All information in this program is known to be accurate at the time of recording. Any commentary by the host is for discussion purposes only. Anyone labeled a person of interest by the host or family has not been charged with a crime. All suspects charged with crimes related or unrelated to a case covered are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Opinions and views expressed by the host do not represent views of the families or sponsors of this program. Welcome to this week's episode of the Weekly Remind. I'm your host, Steve Stone. Today we have something that is not related to the missing, however, still needs the truth. A story that spans a little over 4 decades, and a family that not only needs answers, but needs justice as well. Today we speak with Phyllis Cook. Ronald, who is affectionately called Ronnie by his family, had his life cut short, but was thought to be a suicide. But Phyllis, a strong-willed, brave sister and daughter, began seeking the truth, and the facts were leading her down a road of a scary truth. Ronnie's death was not just a suicide, but a homicide. The homicide, according to facts and other witnesses, was perpetrated by none other than a group known as the Dixie Mafia. Organized crime is not strictly relegated or contained in the larger cities like Chicago and New York. In the South, it is also prevalent. The Dixie Mafia is a criminal organization that was composed of mainly white Southerners, and it was based out of Biloxi, Mississippi, operating primarily in the southern states. They moved drugs, alcohol, prostitution all over the South with the helping hand of corrupt cops, judges, and politicians. And of course, the Dixie Mafia's known method of intimidation and their expertise with violence. So let's begin today's episode with our interview with Phyllis.
For interview purposes, lay out the events leading to Ronnie's homicide.
Okay, and I can do that pretty easy. When Ronnie was 3 years old, Ronnie had developed polio. And so Ronnie wore a brace. He wore a leg brace on his left leg, I think it was, from the hip down. And it was hard for him to get around or, walk or talk or have, play with other kids and have friends. So whenever Mother and Daddy divorced, Ronnie, when he was 15, my stepdad was really abusive and an alcoholic. So Mother sent Ronnie to live with my dad in Gulfport. And that was in July of 1965. Ronnie was there no more than a year and a half whenever he was killed. We were told that it was a suicide, that Ronnie had committed suicide. I had called on September the 25th of 1967. I had called my dad and told him that I had a feeling that something was wrong with Ronnie, that I just could not shake that feeling. Dad assured me that he was okay. He just moved in with a so-called friend of his, Jeffrey Bass, who was my dad's ex-wife's nephew by marriage, and they were going to share an apartment. This Jeffrey Bass was like 18 or 19. Ronnie was 17 at the time. We get a call that I'm on to go to the grocery, pick up things, get the car ready to load, going to pick Ronnie up. I get to come home. There was a note on my door that stated that I needed to call my mom immediately, that something bad had happened. I called and I was told that Ronnie was dead, that he had committed suicide. So for 34 years, out of fear of another one of us kids being murdered or something happening, due to who my dad, a victim of association with his friends and everything, Ronnie had been killed. He had been brutally beaten and murdered. But my dad could not tell. My dad was fearful of something happening, so he went along with the theory that Ronnie staged suicide. So for 34 years, I would call Gulfport Police. I really called the Harrison County Sheriff's Department. And for 34 years, they never told me to call anyone else. So I called the sheriff's department. I would ask them about Ronnie, tell them that I did not think my brother had committed suicide. Would they please investigate it? They put me off all those years saying, well, we're looking into it. We'll get back with you. Yes, ma'am, Daniel, at the time we're going to do. Well, come to find out, my dad would call me shortly after I would call the sheriff's department. My dad would call me and tell me to leave it alone, that nothing was going to bring Ronnie back. Even through the years of my persistent and keep calling, my dad would tell me, leave it the hell, and my dad hardly ever cursed, and he didn't like for me to, no matter how old I was. My dad said, leave it the hell alone before you get someone else killed. Well, at that time, I knew nothing of the Dixie Mafia. I knew nothing of, what really happened to Ronnie, so I would pursue it as soon as my dad would calm down.
Ronnie was befriended by a group within the Dixie Mafia. As Phyllis and I spoke, I learned that Ronnie wanted to be liked. He wanted to please people, and it was something that the Dixie Mafia preyed upon, and they exploited that. There was a movie years and years ago called Walking Tall, and I'm not talking about the movie with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. This is another older version, and it goes through the life and times of Sheriff Buford Purser, whose wife was murdered supposedly by the Dixie Mafia. Phyllis and I discussed the events of this time period and her insight into why Ronnie was murdered in connection with the death of Pauline Purser.
How long in between the time that Ronnie was used to knock on the door from the time that he supposedly committed suicide?
Less than 6 weeks. Ronnie, on August 12th, Ronnie was, and I did not know this, but a live witness has come forward and confirmed everything. And the things that the people tell, that would be like if your wife right now left your house in a pair of pink pants and a purple shirt, going to pick up a lawnmower from a neighbor and you didn't see her anymore, or if your neighbor came over in a pink shirt and some flowered pants and to do something, there would be an incident that only someone that knew, or that someone that would actually tell the truth, that you would know that that was the honest to God truth. Well, the lady that came forward and told that my brother was used as a pawn that night, they murdered Pauline Purser and ambushed Buford Purser on August the 12th of 1967. September the 25th, I called my dad about Ronnie, and he told Ronnie that I was wanting to come get him. My dad jumps at the chance to get Ronnie out of there because he's hoping he can get Ronnie out of there knowing what had happened and that they would soon kill him. Well, that next morning, September the 26th, that evening when they found out I was coming after Ronnie, they murdered him. And it was less than 6 weeks. Well, from August the 12th, the night they used him as a pawn to go to help get entrance into the house for Pauline Purser, September the 26th, they murdered my little brother less than 6 weeks later.
And it's believed that they murdered him because he was a witness to what they did.
Yes, he was used as a pawn that night. The lady told that they used my dad's car and they made Ronnie go with them. It's been told in different books and things that have written that Ronnie borrowed my dad's car. And you know how when people do movies, that's why I've just turned down the great offer to do a movie, and not a documentary, but a movie on my brother and dad's death. But I refused because the truth has to be told. They can't do documentaries and lies and assumptions and ever get the truth told. But it was said that Ronnie had borrowed my dad's car that night to go joyriding or going out, and that they used my brother and my dad's car to go. No. Ronnie wasn't but 17, and I don't think Ronnie even had driver's license at that time. I never known him to have a driver's license or his own car. I think Kirsty Nix or either Irvin Moore had borrowed my dad's car, and they made Ronnie go with them. And the lady told that they were going to use Ronnie as a pawn. And the night that they called for Buford Purser on that fake call for him to leave the house to go out on County Road due to the disturbance of some drunks, well, Pauline decided to ride with him. the Dixie Mafia bunch, all of them not knowing that she was going to go. They were sitting down the road, and they were going to have Ronnie go up and knock on the door after Buford Puster left. And when Pauline saw a little 17-year-old skinny guy there with a leg brace or whatever, she would open the door. When she opened the door, they were going to charge in and kill Pauline to show Buford Puster how it felt, because he had killed Louise Hadcock, who was alleged to have been a mistress of Towhead White. Now, I can feel comfortable saying that, and I can feel that God in heaven and myself knows I'm telling the truth on this, because I have pictures of my dad sitting at his kitchen table playing cards with Towhead White and Bobby Joe Fabian and Mike Gillick, a bunch of the Dixie Mafia thugs that were right before, Towhead was killed, and in between of Ronnie being killed, right after Ronnie was murdered. So, I know that the things that she was telling, I know she told the truth. And yes, my dad's car was used, and yes, my little brother was murdered. She said that after Ronnie, they got back home and everything was fine. Of course, that was August the 12th. They got back home probably wee hours mornings of the 13th after they killed her. Well, I didn't call until September the 25th, about 4 or 5 weeks later. So Ronnie was okay during that time. But when they found out that I'd made that call to my dad and that I was coming to pick Ronnie up, and Ronnie was still 17, if my dad told him to pack his clothes and go, he had to pack his clothes and go, because no matter at what age, we respected what my dad told us. My dad was a man of few words when he told you something. So Ronnie, I'm sure against Ronnie wanting to go too, because he was dating a little girl named Kathy, and it's alleged that she was pregnant at the time. So it was stated that because Ronnie was leaving Gulfport, and they were afraid that he would divulge what happened that night and who all was involved, and then also, I guess, against their code that he was leaving, that little girl, Kathy, and her alleged to have been pregnant with his child, that they she lured him down to the boat docks, and it was told that Ronnie was living in an apartment with this Jeffrey Bass, that they just rented a boarding house apartment, and that Ronnie was sitting on the bed playing with a .410 shotgun, and that the gun went off and shot Ronnie.
Now, I can tell you, having spoken with Phyllis many times, even before this interview, there's no doubt that she has the pulse of what really happened to her brother Ronnie. This horrific event is more than just a story, but it has people with names, and those names attached to the Dixie Mafia, well-known members of the Dixie Mafia. The events and the time frame all line up. Phyllis has dedicated years of her time, energy, emotional stress, researching and gathering evidence and speaking with people that are willing to talk. There is no doubt in Phyllis's mind that Robbie was in fact murdered. In this last clip, Phyllis explains how and the people involved.
What happened was this little girl lured Ronnie down to the boat docks, and Kirsty Nix, Irvin Moore, Eddie Ray Moore, Jeffrey Bass, and a guy named Onis White, along with local law enforcement that were involved with the Dixie Mafia. They brutally beat Ronnie unmercifully, and then the girl made the statement. She said, and this coincided with everything that my dad had told, and then the day my dad positively identified Jeffrey Bass as the murderer. This woman said, and after they beat him, she said, Jeffrey Bass decided to take it one step further, and he shot Ronnie in the head. They then put Ronnie into a blue Cadillac that belonged to Roger Steinberg, who that was the second car that was involved with the assassination attempt on Buford, that no one knew who it belonged to and what happened. And I've had other people confirm who it belonged to, but they put Ronnie in the car, and they drove him over to my stepmother's house, Rose Moore, and her two sons, Eddie Ray and Irvin. They were involved with all the beating and the assassination stuff. She and Jeffrey Bass, they bathed Ronnie, cleaned him up, changed his clothes and all before either taking him to Memorial Hospital themselves or either having the first responder come out and ambulance pick him up. But anyway, when my dad got the knock on the door from local law enforcement that he needed to go to the hospital, Rose met my daddy at the hospital. So if the question was always, how did she know about Ronnie being killed and all, even before my dad did? Well, it's easy to answer because Jeffrey Bass was her nephew, the one that shot Ronnie, and her two boys were the one involved in with the assassination on Pauline and the attempt on Buford and the murder of my brother. So she met my dad at the hospital, and that's how and she told my dad he was dead.
Let me ask you this.
But my dad could never tell what really happened because he knew that they would either kill him or another one of us kids. So my dad carried that guilt with him until November the 27th of 2002.
There is so much more about this case that we just can't fit into one episode or two episodes. And that's just Ronnie's case. We haven't even gotten to Lieutenant Anderson's case, which is Phyllis's father. When Ronnie was taken to the hospital, he was too clean for someone that had just committed suicide, that had just shot himself. Without getting into too many details, he was just too clean for someone that had committed suicide. Phyllis completed a Freedom of Information Act request, or FOIA request, in 2017 for autopsy, cause of death report, and any other information related to the investigation into his suicide. That FOIA request was denied. I leave you with this question. If Ronnie Anderson committed suicide and it was ruled a suicide, why was the FOIA request denied? As I do with the missing, I believe in searching for the truth and helping those in search of that truth. I've asked Phyllis to join her on her journey in searching for the truth and getting justice, not only for Ronnie, but for her dad, Lieutenant Anderson. We will be working on a separate project and independent from the Grimm Truth Podcast in a special series in the upcoming months regarding the Dixie Mafia and the murders of Ronald Anderson and Lieutenant Anderson. I want to thank Phyllis for coming on and just telling us what she believes to be true and the facts that she's gathered, and I look forward to working with her in the coming months. This week's Case Remind is going to be about Michael Hawley Jr. Michael Hawley Jr. went missing on February the 14th, 2007 from Taylor, Michigan. He's 5'7", weighing 130 pounds with brown hair and brown eyes. Michael was at a friend's house with his girlfriend, Amanda Galvin, seen here with her father. Now, Amanda and Michael had a tumultuous relationship. And unfortunately, it led to violence being done to Michael by Amanda's father. Getting back to the night he went missing, Michael and Amanda leave. They get to a phone. Amanda calls her father. We know this because Michael contacted his family, left a message saying that he needed a ride and that he needed to get out as soon as possible because he didn't think he was going to make it. He felt that something bad was going to happen to him by the hands of Amanda's father. We know this, too, because a witness who came forward just weeks ago said that Michael made that very same statement to this anonymous source, as well as witnessed Michael days after a beating he received at the hands of Amanda Galvin's father. Amanda's father had been violent several times with Michael, and it wasn't new. Michael had explained that he was scared of Amanda's father and was just in fear from his life. We are continuing to look into this case, as well as talking to others that may have been fearful of coming forward in the past. We understand that. But we also understand that Michael's family needs this information. Michael's mom passed away not knowing what happened to her son. And we want to make sure that any information that can help lead to bringing Michael home is brought to the front and to the knowledge of law enforcement. If you have any information on the whereabouts of Michael Hawley Jr., please contact 1-800-SPEAK-UP or email me, stevestone@thegrimtruth.com, stevestone@thegrimtruth.com, or message me on Facebook Messenger @thegrimtruth with 2 M's. We are going to have a second episode on Michael's case in the coming weeks on the Grim Truth podcast. We also have in the description below the original episode we did on Michael's case. If you haven't done so, please take a listen and share. We really need your help. Again, I want to thank Phyllis for coming on and working with us and allowing us to tell this story about her brother. And we really look forward to working with her on this future project and getting the story out. She really needs justice. She's tired of people turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to this story. It's real, and it needs the attention. And as always, the attention on the missing, and in this case the murdered, are the most important thing that we can do, and sharing it with you, and then you sharing it with others. It's what we do. It's our mission. I want to thank you for watching this episode of the Weekly Remind. Come back next week as we have another episode. And as always, we are the media for the missing. Goodbye.